They spit in her tip jar. Then the mafia boss poured $50,000 on the counter. The air in New Adelphi is something you breathe with your teeth. It was just before dawn, that gray hour when the city hasn't decided if it's dying or being born. Salt frost, thick as paint, coated the steel guardrails along the river. Out on the water, past the cracked pavement of the promenade, the container ships groaned at Pier 19. Metal straining against the tide, the sodium vapor lamps were still buzzing, casting a sick, sticky, honey-colored light on everything. Inside the Docklight Cafe, the air was warmer but just as tired. It smelled of burnt coffee grounds, industrial bleach, and the faint, sweet rot of the river clinging to the windows. Cala Reyes, was 24 years old and living on the fumes of the night shift. My rag was gray, moving in slow circles, trying to erase the rings left by a dozen cups that had come and gone. The counter was my world. In front of me sat the jar. It was thick glass, meant for pickles or preserves, with a chipped mouth. The word tips was written on masking tape in faded black marker. I was separating the quarters from the dimes, the singles from the fives. It was a slow count, a ritual of survival. Every coin was a minute I'd bought. The bell above the door didn't chime. It clanged, a harsh, metallic sound that cracked the quiet. 3 of them stumbled in. They weren't sailors or dock workers. They were softer, smelling of top-shelf liquor turned sour, and the kind of cologne that tries too hard. Their laughter was loud, filling the small space, bouncing off the tile. They leaned against the counter, shoving each other. I stood up straight, wiping my hands on my apron. What can I get you? The leader, the one with the expensive watch sliding loose on his wrist, squinted at me. Hear that, boys? She squeaks. He mimicked my voice, pitching his own, high and nasal. Just coffee, I said. My voice was low. It was always low at the end of a shift. Look at that, another one said, pointing at my ear. She found that in a gutter. I touched the small silver hoop. It was cheap, true, but it was mine. I felt the heat rise in my face, a hot tide of shame and anger. I hated this part of the job. I hated the feeling of being small, of being a target just for existing. Black coffee, 3, I said, turning to the machine. Wait, the leader said, grabbing the tip jar. He held it up, rattling the coins. This all you got, sweetheart? This is pathetic. Put it down, I said. He smiled, a wide, wet motion, and then he leaned forward, gathered himself, and spat. It wasn't a small thing. It was deliberate, thick, and loud. It landed with a cold, wet thud on the pile of singles and quarters. A perfect, disgusting insult. The world stopped. The hum of the espresso machine seemed to fade. I just stared at the jar. I could feel my hands shaking, not with fear, but with a white-hot rage that had nowhere to go. I had scrubbed that counter. I had smiled at people who didn't see me, and this man had, in 1 second, taken all of it and defiled it. The bell clanged again. I didn't look up. I was too busy trying to breathe, trying to not throw the nearest heavy thing at the man who was still laughing. But the laughter cut off. It stopped so fast it was like a switch had been thrown. The air in the cafe changed. It didn't get louder, it got heavier, compressed. I finally looked up. The 3 drunks were frozen, staring at the door. 4 men stood there. No, 3 men stood behind 1 man. They wore dark suits, wool overcoats that cost more than my apartment, and expressions that were flat, clean, and empty. They moved like water, flowing into the space around the tables, silent and absolute. The man in the lead was Carmine Sorrenti. I knew the name. Everyone in New Adelphi knew the name. You didn't say it loud. He was the Sorrenti Combine. He was the shadow that owned the docks, the unions, and the silence in between. He looked to be in his late 30s, maybe 40. His suit was cut so precisely it looked like it could draw blood. He didn't look at the drunks. He looked at me. His eyes were dark and analytical. He took in the room, the counter, and then, finally, his gaze settled on the tip jar. He moved slowly, without any wasted motion. He walked to the counter, the polish on his shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He didn't acknowledge the drunks who were practically shrinking into the wall. He reached out a gloved hand and gently, almost clinically, slid the defiled tip jar toward him. He looked inside it, at the spittle gleaming on the crumpled bills. Then he looked at the man with the watch. Carmine Sorrenti reached inside his perfect suit jacket. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a brick of cash, still wrapped in a bank band. It was thick with $100 bills. He placed it on the counter. It landed with a solid, definitive thud, a judgment. It was $50,000. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of a verdict. Carmine's voice, when it came, was not loud. It was deep, calm, and carried the lazy weight of absolute authority. He spoke to the drunks, but he never took his eyes off me. "She makes coffee," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You make disgrace." The air changed. The drunks were sober now, pale and sweating. The few other customers in the booths, a night watchman. A couple of students were perfectly still, trying to blend into the vinyl. And me, I was stunned. But beneath the shock, the anger was still there. Only now it had a new target. He had made me the center of his theater. He had put a price tag on my humiliation. And it was worse. "I don't want your money," I said. My voice shook, but it was clear. Carmine finally turned his head, just slightly, to look at the drunks. They flinched. "I want them to apologize," I said, my gaze fixed on the man who had spit. "And I want them to clean the jar." A flicker of something surprise interest passed across Carmine Sorrenti's face. He looked at me for a long beat. Then, he reached for the napkin dispenser on the counter and slid it toward the three men. The sound of the plastic sliding on the formica was deafening. "Time to be men," Carmine said, his voice flat. The leader, the one with the watch, looked like he was going to be sick. He fumbled for the napkins. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely pull them free. The three of them, these big, loud men, suddenly looked like terrified children. They started digging into the jar, pulling out the wet bills, wiping the glass, their eyes darting everywhere except at Carmine, or at the internal security camera mounted above the register. While they were hunched over their shame, one of Carmine's men moved. He was tall, with the sharp face of a bird of prey. Ivo Kestrel. He moved to the end of the counter, near my workstation. I had an old webcam perched on the monitor, one I sometimes used to chat with my mother. The little green light was on. I hadn't turned it on. Someone was watching, streaming. Ivo didn't smash it. He simply took a small piece of black tape from his pocket and pressed it firmly over the lens, blinding it. The drunks finished. They pushed the cleaned, empty jar back onto the counter. Carmine pulled another bill from his wallet, a single, slim 100. He placed it by the jar. "This is for sanitation," he said to me. His gaze was heavy, pinning me in place. The rest, he tapped the brick of $50,000. "How you use it is your business." He turned to leave. "I can't take this," I said, pushing the stack of money back toward him. It felt wrong. It felt like a chain. He stopped, one hand on the door. He looked back, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who understands how the world works, a smile that knew things I didn't. "Leave it, Nair," he said. "Decency needs a budget." And then he and his men were gone. The bell clanged. The door hissed shut. The cafe was silent again, but the air was poisoned. The drunks threw some cash on the counter and fled, tripping over each other to get out. I was left alone with the smell of bleach, the empty jar, and $50,000. My hand was shaking as I reached for the other bill, the one he'd left for sanitation. I picked it up. It wasn't just a $100 bill. Printed in the corner, small and official looking, was a logo, an eagle grasping a harbor anchor. Beneath it, in stark block letters, were the words Bureau of Harbor Compliance. I'd heard the name before, in whispers from the longshoremen who came in at 3 a.m. A ghost agency, a branch of the government that wasn't the government, a name people muttered when they talked about how things really got done on the water. It wasn't a tip, it was a summons. By the time I finished my shift, the sun was a dirty smear above the warehouses. I took the $50,000. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't leave it. I couldn't keep it. I put the brick of cash into my backpack, where it sat heavy as a tombstone against my textbooks and my sketchbook. I felt its weight with every step I took home to my tiny fourth-floor walk-up. I hid it under the floorboard beneath my bed, next to the shutoff valve for the radiator. I didn't sleep. I just watched the light change in my room. The next day, the world broke open. Someone had filmed it, not just the webcam that Evo Kestrel had covered, but someone in the booths, with a phone. The clip was everywhere. It was on NextWave, New Adelphi's own streaming gutter. The title was lurid, barista humiliated, then the Don dropped $50K. It had 800,000 views by noon. I walked into the docklight for my shift, and the place was a zoo. The line was out the door. But they weren't here for coffee. They were here for the show. They were filming me with their phones, whispering, pointing. I was no longer Cala Reyes, barista. I was the girl from the video. I was a curiosity. Miri Lax, the owner, was a small, anxious woman who lived on antacids and good intentions. She pulled me into the back office, her hands fluttering like trapped birds. "Cala, honey, this is too much," she whispered, gesturing to the crowd. "Maybe you should take a few days off. Paid, please, just until this dies down." "I can't, Miri," I said, my voice flat. I was already tying my apron, the familiar knot a small anchor in the storm. "I need the shifts. You know I do." She did know. She knew about the mountain of debt from the 2 years of architecture school I'd completed before the money ran out. And she knew about my mother. My mother was in St. Halcyon Home, a private care facility with a glossy brochure and a razor wire contract. It was another one of New Adelphi's gray market institutions, existing in the legal shadows, charging 5-star prices for 2-star care. The bills were relentless. Taking a day off wasn't an option. Taking a breath wasn't an option. So I went out. I faced the cameras. I made lattes. I steamed milk. I forced my hands to be steady as I took their money, their eyes crawling all over me. The messages started that afternoon. My phone, which was usually silent except for reminders and texts from my best friend, Juno, was now blowing up. My number must have been leaked. There were interview requests from local bloggers. There were offers from sleazy brands wanting me to endorse their empowerment teas. And then there were the others. The first one came from an anonymous account on NextWave, a private message, at Ghost Pier, the name read. It was a picture. It was my apartment building, taken from the street. I felt a cold lurch in my stomach. I blocked the user. A new message came from a different anonymous number. This one was a photo of my window on the 4th floor, taken from the roof of the building across the street. I could see the silhouette of my drafting lamp on the sill. The timestamp was 3:17 a.m. I had been asleep, or trying to be. Someone had been watching me while I hid Carmine Sorrenti's money. I kept working. The coffee machine was my shield. The noise, the steam, the repetitive motions, pull the shot, steam the milk, wipe the counter, repeat. Around 4 p.m., 2 men came in. They didn't fit the new tourist crowd, and they weren't dock workers. They wore identical navy blue blazers that looked like uniforms. They had sharp haircuts and dead-looking eyes. They waited until the line cleared, then approached the counter. "Cala Reyes," the taller one asked. He didn't order anything. "I'm working," I said. He placed a business card on the counter. "We're from the Wyeth Trust. We're an urban development fund." I'd heard the name. They were the ones putting up luxury condos on the old fishing piers, the ones with the cheerful blue and white logos that read, "Revitalizing New Adelphi's Future." "We saw the video," the second man said. "Terrible. What you went through. We'd like to help you control your narrative." "What does that mean?" "It means," the first man said, leaning in, that your story has value, a working-class woman insulted, then burdened by a gift from a known criminal entity. It's a powerful message. We want to buy the rights to it. We'll give you a platform, help you tell it properly, for our new public outreach campaign. You want to buy what happened to me? We're offering $5,000, he said, as if it were a generous final offer. I looked at the brick of $50,000 I knew was still under my floor. I looked at these two clean-cut men, and I felt the same rage from the day before, only colder. My story isn't for sale, I said. Now, are you going to order coffee, or are you going to leave? They smiled, but it didn't reach their eyes. Think about it, the tall one said. It's a better class of money. They left the card and walked out. I texted Juno after my shift, telling her about the Wyeth Trust. Her reply was instant and sharp. Juno Calla, stay away, far away. Wyeth is a washing machine. They're the clean front for the Icarus crew. The Icarus crew, the name left a metallic taste in my mouth. They were the other side of the coin. If Sorrenti owned the docks, Icarus owned the scaffolding, the construction contracts, the city inspectors. The two crews were in a cold war for the soul of the waterfront. Juno, they're trying to use you against Sorrenti. Don't let them... I went home. The feeling of being watched was so intense I kept my blinds drawn. I pulled out my old portfolio, the heavy black binder that held my past. I turned the pages, past the light and shadow studies, past the structural sketches. I stopped at the last section, my thesis project, the Helix Bridge. It was my dream, a pedestrian and light rail bridge designed to curve like a strand of DNA, connecting the abandoned coal yards with the residential district. It was designed to bring life back to the dead side of the river. It was my answer to the city's decay. City Hall had rejected the proposal. Of course. The letter was clipped to the page. Financially unfeasible and structurally overambitious. I traced the elegant curve of the main support cable with my finger. It was feasible. I knew it just required someone to care more about connection than about profit. I packed the sketchbook and my best drawings into my backpack. I didn't know why. I just couldn't leave them in the apartment, not while a ghost peer was watching. The next day, the window of the Docklight Cafe exploded. It wasn't a brick, it was a steel ball bearing, fired from a wrist rocket or something similar. It punched a perfect spider-webbing circle in the glass right at my eye level. I screamed and dropped a tray of cups. Mary was in hysterics. While she was on the phone with the police, my cell rang, a blocked number. I picked it up. Hello. Give back the dirty money, circus freak. The voice was a digital buzz, distorted and sexless. Give it back, or the next one goes through your skull. I hung up, my hand trembling so hard I dropped the phone. The police came. They took a report. They looked at me with bored, suspicious eyes. You know a guy named Carmine Sorrenti, one of them asked, chewing on a toothpick. You run with his crew? I make coffee. I said. He laughed. Sure you do, sweetheart. They left. They did nothing. Mary was crying, sweeping up the glass. That's it, Calla. I can't. I have a lease. I have a family. I'm closing. Mary, no, please. This is what they want. I don't care what they want. I want to be safe. Give me one more day, I pleaded. Just one more. She shook her head, but she didn't have the strength to fight me. Just then, something dark slid under the front door, which we had locked. It was a black envelope, thick cardstock, embossed with a gold seal. I picked it up. It was from the Metropolitan Integrity Commission, another official-sounding name I'd never heard of. I tore it open. It was an order, a summary closure, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into reported food safety and sanitation violations. It was a lie. We were spotless. Mary was obsessive about it. That's it, Mary sobbed, collapsing onto a stool. We're done. They win. I looked at the order. I looked at the broken window. I looked at Mary, defeated, and all the fear, all the humiliation. It burned away. It left something hard and cold in its place. I walked to the front door and unlocked it. I turned the neon open sign back on. "Calla, what are you doing?" Mary shrieked. I walked behind the counter. I hit the power switch on the espresso machine. The familiar, loud hum filled the cafe. I grabbed the portafilter and slammed it into the grinder. "I'm making coffee," I said. It was an act of defiance. It was the only weapon I had. I was tamping the grounds when a shadow fell across the counter, blocking the weak morning light. A black sedan, long and silent as a shark, had pulled up to the curb. The door of the cafe opened. The bell didn't clang this time. It was like the sound was afraid to make itself known. It was Carmine Sorrenti. He was alone. He wore the same kind of dark, flawless suit. He walked to the counter, his eyes taking in the broken window, the closure notice on the counter, and me, with my hand on the espresso machine. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask what happened. He simply placed a single folded document on the counter. It was heavy, linen paper. I unfolded it. It was a temporary operating permit. It had a different seal, the eagle and the anchor, the Bureau of Harbor Compliance. "The cafe stays open," Carmine Sorrenti said, his voice that same low, calm rumble. "Their rules don't apply here." He didn't leave. The heavy glass door hissed shut, sealing the cafe in a new kind of silence. Miri, my boss, had vanished into the stockroom. I could hear her faintly, on the phone, her voice a high-pitched thread of panic. I was alone with Carmine Sorrenti. The broken glass at the front of the shop seemed to glitter, acknowledging his presence. He stood by the counter, his dark overcoat unbuttoned. He looked at the gleaming, complex mass of the espresso machine as if it were a piece of artillery. "This," I said, my voice hoarse, holding up the permit from his ghost agency. "What does this mean?" "It means you're open," he said simply. He began, with a deliberate lack of haste, to unbutton the cuffs of his white shirt. They were held by simple, silver knots. "It means Mirilax is not in violation of any code I recognize." He rolled his left sleeve up, once, then twice, revealing a thick, muscular forearm. He did the same with his right, and as he did, I saw it, a thin white scar. It started at the bony protrusion of his wrist and vanished under the folded cotton, disappearing toward his elbow. It was old, but it hadn't been a jagged, accidental wound. It was straight, clinical. He looked at me. "I've been told," he said, his voice dropping into a conversational tone that was more unsettling than a shout, "that a new Adelphi cortado is specific, that it's not the same as the ones they serve uptown." I just stared at him. It's just espresso and milk." "No," he said. "It's about the ratio. Show me." It wasn't a request. He placed his watch on the counter. It was a Patek Philippe. I recognized it from the magazines the businessmen sometimes left behind. It was worth more than the cafe, more than my entire tuition. He set it down next to the fraudulent closure notice from the Metropolitan Integrity Commission. Then he did the one thing I didn't expect. He lifted the counter flap and stepped behind it. My world, my small, safe territory of stainless steel and tile, was instantly invaded. He was too big for the space. He smelled of expensive wool, cold air, and something I couldn't place. Something metallic and clean, like sandalwood and iron. I had to take a half step back, and my shoulder blades brushed the bean grinder. "Grind first," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was an instructor teaching a shark how to swim. He nodded, waiting. I demonstrated, dosing the portafilter. "Now you." He took the handle from me. His fingers were long and clean. He held it under the grinder. He was a natural mimic. His movements were economical and precise. "Tamp," I said, pushing the weighted tamper toward him. He pressed down, too hard. "No," I said, and before I could stop myself, I put my hand over his. "You'll choke it. It's not about force. It's about finding the level, even pressure." He didn't move. He was stock still. We were inches apart. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could see the dark stubble on his jaw, the fine lines at the corner of his eye. I was breathing the air he had just exhaled. His gaze, I realized, was not possessive. The men from the Wyeth Trust had looked at me like they wanted to buy me. The drunks had looked at me like they wanted to break me. Carmine Sorrenti looked at me like he was surveying. His eyes were mapping the terrain of my face, noting the foundation, the stress points, the resilience. It was the look of a man who understands how things are built and how they fall. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. "Lock it in," I said, gesturing to the machine. He locked the handle in place, hit the switch, the machine hissed, and the rich, dark liquid began to pour. "Respect," as he said, watching the espresso drip, "is like urban infrastructure, Cala." I stiffened. He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. "You let it decay," he continued, his voice a low rumble beneath the machine's hum. "You neglect the maintenance. You let thugs spit on it, and the whole thing collapses." He made a small, vague gesture that included the broken window, the city, everything. I was steaming the milk, my hand steady by pure force of will. "Infrastructure is easy," I said, the words sharp. "It's just steel and concrete. It doesn't have a choice." I thought of my Helix bridge, my rejected dream. A bridge only stands when both sides agree to hold the weight. He stopped watching the espresso and watched me. When he didn't smile, he just registered the statement. The machine hissed. The milk was done. I poured it into the small glass, a perfect, clean, white dot on a black surface. "You need a good foundation," he said. He took the glass. Just as he lifted it, the bell on the door clanged. It was Ivo Kestrel, his hawk-faced guard. He didn't enter. He just stood in the doorway, a sentinel, and caught Carmine's eye. Ivo gave a small, almost imperceptible tilt of his head toward the roof of the building across the street, the one where at Ghost Pier had taken the picture. A lens. Someone was watching, a sniper. Carmine didn't flinch. He didn't look. He didn't duck. He slowly raised the cortado to his lips and took a sip. But outside, the world shifted. It was invisible, but I felt it. A black sedan that had been idling down the street pulled forward, its angle changing, presenting a wall of metal. Two men I hadn't even registered. Men who had been reading newspapers on a park bench stood up simultaneously. They didn't draw weapons. They just moved. They became a gray woolen shield, blocking the line of sight from the roof to the cafe's interior, their bodies forming a barrier. All from one tiny glance. "Good coffee," Carmine said, setting the glass down. The crisis, whatever it was over. He rolled his sleeves down. He buttoned the silver knots. He slid the Patek Philippe back onto his wrist, the metal clicking softly into place. The intimacy of the lesson was gone. He was the Don again. He pulled a card from his jacket. It wasn't a business card. It was thick, black cardstock, completely blank on one side. He turned it over. The other side had only a 10-digit number, printed in stark white. "Call," he said, sliding it across the counter. "When the wind changes." It wasn't a question of if, it was a statement of when. I didn't want to take it. Taking it was an agreement. It was stepping onto his side of the bridge, but the image of the spider-webbed glass, the memory of the distorted voice on the phone. I picked it up. The card was heavy, the edges sharp. He turned to leave, but he had left the cortado. "You forgot this," I said, lifting the small glass. He stopped, his hand on the door. He turned back. He walked a few steps to the counter and took the glass from my hand. His fingers brushed mine. It wasn't a spark. It wasn't romantic. It was electricity. It was the cold, shocking jolt of touching a live wire, a feeling of immense, grounded, terrifying power. It wasn't fear. It was recognition, a deep, primal understanding that this man was a force of nature, a fixed point in the chaos. I snatched my hand back. He nodded once, a formal gesture of thanks. Then he and his men were gone. They didn't just leave. They receded, like a tide pulling back, taking the pressure, the danger, and the heavy silence with them. The black sedan slid into traffic and vanished. I stood there, my hand tingling. Miri finally emerged from the back, her face pale. "He's gone." I nodded. I looked at the counter. The pickle jar, my tip jar, was still there, but it wasn't empty. While I had been hiding, while the crowds had been filming, the neighborhood had come back. The jar was full, overflowing, not with $50,000 bricks, but with crumpled singles, with fives, with quarters. And jammed in between the money were folded scraps of paper, receipts, torn off corners of napkins. I pulled one out. "Thanks for staying open, Calla." I pulled out another. "New Adelphi sees you. Don't let the suits win." A third. "This is for the window." My eyes blurred. They hadn't been filming me because I was a freak. They had been supporting me because I was one of them. Juno, my best friend, burst in, skidding to a halt. "I saw the car. I saw Sorrenti. Calla, what the hell just happened? Are you okay?" I just pointed to the jar. She read the notes, her eyes wide. She looked at me, a slow, fierce smile spreading across her face. "Well, damn, Calla," she said. "This is a storm. You can't fight it. You're the story now. So you might as well use it, Monday. You have to steer into it." She was right. I thought of the $50,000 under my floor. I thought of the Wyeth Trust, the Icarus crew, and the shark who had just taught me his own infrastructure lesson. I thought of my mother, trapped in St. Halcyon home, and the bills piling up. I took my backpack from under the counter. I pulled out my portfolio, the one with my thesis, the Helix Bridge, my dream. "Okay," I said. I took out my phone. I opened my long-dormant student art account. I took a clear, crisp photo of my favorite rendering of the bridge, the one showing it lit up at night, connecting the two dead shores. I wrote a caption, "Helix Bridge Project, selling limited edition prints. Signed, all proceeds go to the St. Halcyon Home Patient Fund." I hit post. For the first time in days, I felt like I was breathing again. That night, I was in my apartment. The blinds were drawn, the door was double locked, the $50,000 was still under the floor. Carmine's black card was in the pocket of my jeans. My phone buzzed, a private message. From at Ghost Pier. My blood went cold. I opened it. It was a new photograph. It was taken in the dark, but the resolution was sharp. It was a picture of the back of Carmine's black contact card, the white 10-digit number perfectly clear. I felt the air leave my lungs. I was holding that card. It was in my pocket. This picture hadn't been taken through a window. It hadn't been taken from a roof. It had been taken from inches away, while I was walking home, or, a far worse thought, they had been in my apartment. They were not just watching. They were close enough to touch. My hands were shaking, but not with indecision. It was with a cold, clear fury. I pulled the black card from my pocket. I typed the 10 digits into my phone. I sent a text, just 2 words. Winds changed. The reply to my text did not come as a message. It came as a vibration. 2 sharp buzzes, exactly 60 seconds later. I looked out my 4th-floor window, down at the rain-slicked street. The city was a smear of neon and fog. Nothing. Then, a black sedan I hadn't noticed before, parked across the street, flashed its headlights. Once, twice. I grabbed my backpack. I emptied my tip jar into it, the one filled with neighborhood support. I put my sketchbook on top. I looked at the $50,000 under the floorboard. I left it. It was bait. It was an anchor. It was not mine. I walked down the stairs, my keys clutched between my fingers. The lobby was empty. I pushed open the heavy front door. The sedan was already at the curb. The back door opened as if by remote. Ivo Kestrel, Carmine's hawk-faced man, was in the passenger seat. He didn't look at me. He was watching the rooftops. "Get in, Miss Reyes," the driver said, his voice flat. I slid onto the cold leather. The door shut with a heavy, final thump. The car did not move. "We wait 1 minute," the driver said, his eyes on the rearview mirror. We sat in silence. The car idled. A low, powerful thrum I felt in my chest. I watched a man walk his dog past the laundromat. Everything was normal, but my world had tilted. "Clear," Ivo said. The car pulled away from the curb, but we didn't go toward the river. We didn't go downtown. We went north. into the maze of one-way streets in the old textile district. We took a right, a left, another right, then a U-turn that was probably illegal. "What are we doing?" I asked. "A mirror route," the driver said, "checking for a tail. We were followed from the cafe yesterday. They won't make the same mistake today." I realized I was a package. I was cargo. We drove for 10 minutes, doubling back on ourselves, before finally cutting through a switching yard and emerging onto the harbor access road. We passed the neon sign of the docklight, dark and silent. We passed Pier 19. We drove further to the industrial spine of the city, where the warehouses were just black monoliths against the water. The car slowed and turned into a narrow alley, stopping before a solid steel roll door. The driver flashed the headlights in a coded rhythm. The door groaned and rolled upward, revealing a dark, cavernous space. We drove inside. The door rolled shut behind us, plunging us into darkness before rows of lights flickered on overhead. The car was designated Ardea 7. I saw the small character stenciled on the inside of the door. We were in an old warehouse, but it was clean. The floor was sealed concrete. The air smelled of machine oil, ozone, and the faint, briny scent of the river. "This way," Ivo said, opening my door. He led me past stacks of wooden crates, all stenciled with the same eagle and anchor logo of the Bureau of Harbor Compliance. This was not a safe house. It was a fortress. We went up a flight of metal stairs to a mezzanine level. The walls here were exposed brick, but they were warmed by dozens of exposed filament bulbs, hanging at different heights, creating pools of yellow light. It was beautiful. It was the Lumen. The old name was still painted on the brick Lumen Harbor Light and Signal, a warehouse for the massive bulbs and lenses that guided ships. Carmine Sorrenti was standing at the far end of the room, in front of a massive backlit map of New Adelphi. He was not alone. A woman stood with him, her back to me. She was tall, rail-thin, and wore a severe gray suit. Her dark hair was pulled into a knot so tight it looked painful. She turned as I approached. Her face was sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of emotion. She looked less like a lawyer and more like a surgeon. "Calla Reyes," Carmine said. He did not introduce himself. "This is my legal counsel, Sarah Novick." Sarah Novick looked me up and down. "You're the pressure point," she said. Her voice was a dry rasp. No greeting. "You understand what's happening." "Someone is harassing me," I said. "Someone named Ghost Pier? Someone from the Wyeth Trust?" Sarah shook her head, impatient. "That's the what, not the why. The Wyeth Trust, which is the financial arm of the Icarus crew, wants the new harbor contract. The city council is set to vote in 3 weeks. It's worth billions. They have been quietly clearing the board buying leases, pushing out unions, faking code violations." She pointed to the Docklight Cafe on the map. "You were just a barista in a shop on their list. Miri Lax wouldn't sell. They were preparing to break her lease on a technicality." "Then I went viral," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "You went viral," Carmine corrected, his voice cutting in. "And you were seen with me. You didn't just become a story. Calla, you became a symbol. Wyeth couldn't just crush you. They had to use you, turn you against me, paint you as the victim of a mob boss." "And Ghost Pier, their deniable asset," Sarah said, "designed to terrorize you into accepting Wyeth's protection. The men in the blazers, the phone calls, the broken window. It was all a script. It ends with you on Next Wave, crying, accepting their $5,000 check, and denouncing Carmine." Carmine pointed to the map. It was a web of red and blue lines. "This is our city," he said. He tapped the trade nodes, the shipping lanes, the council districts he controlled. Then he tapped a block of buildings downtown. "And this is their bank." The label read ESIB, Eastern Seaboard Integrity Bureau. "Another ghost," I whispered. "Worse," Sarah said. "It's a quasi-public agency. It's the accounting tool Wyeth uses to launder their development funds and make them look like public grants. They are the ones who sign off on the integrity of the harbor bids. They are Wyeth. Wyeth is ESIB. Carmine looked at me, which brings us to the plan, a de-escalation. Sarah took over, pointing to a new screen. Phase 1. Secure the asset, the Docklight Cafe. My team has already filed a counter-injunction against the Metropolitan Integrity Commission, citing jurisdictional overreach by the Bureau of Harbor Compliance. We will bury them in paper. Phase 2, Carmine said, is neutralizing Ghost Pier. Evo is tracking the signal. We find the source, we cut the head. Phase 3, Sarah finished, is the narrative. They want to use your story. We take it back. Your friend, Juno Pell. She runs a local podcast. Yes, Tip Jar Truths. I was stunned. They knew about Juno. It's just a small... She just talks about local issues. It's trusted, Carmine said. You will go on her show. You will tell your story. Not the one Wyeth wrote, the true one, the spittle, the window, the closure notice. You will tell them you are a citizen of New Adelphi, and you are being harassed by a predatory developer. I stood there, the weight of their strategy pressing down on me. They were using me, just as skillfully as Wyeth. I found my voice. It was shaking, but it was firm. No. Sarah Novick raised an eyebrow. Carmine just watched me, his face unreadable. I have conditions, I said, my heart hammering. I will not be the reason for a war. I won't have my name on a body bag. We are not at war, Sarah said dismissively. This is a legal dispute. I want your word, I said, looking straight at Carmine. No blood. No one gets hurt. You don't get to cut the head if it means what I think it means. You don't use my story as an excuse to take their territory. I was terrified. I was a barista giving orders to a killer. Carmine held my gaze. The silence in the room stretched thin. I could feel Evo behind me, motionless. I could feel Sarah's impatience. Carmine nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. No smoke, he said. No kitchen knives, just legal. And public opinion. You have my word. A kitchen knife, the street term for a stiletto, the classic mafia weapon. He was agreeing to my terms, in his own language. Good, I said, though my legs felt weak. Now, what about my mother? Sarah's face tightened. We're working on that. St. Halcyon is complicated. They're part of it, aren't they? They have investment ties to the Wyeth Trust, Sarah admitted. Carmine put a hand on my shoulder. It was not a comfort. It was a redirection. We can't work here, he said. He led me from the main room, down a short hall. He opened a door. My breath caught. It wasn't a bedroom. It was a studio. It was an architect's office. A massive, backlit drafting table stood in the center. The walls were lined with corkboard. On a steel shelf were rolls of tracing paper, drafting pencils, scales, T-squares, and a single elegant black clamp lamp. He had not given me a cage. He had given me an office. He saw the look on my face. I saw your portfolio, he said simply. The one in your backpack, when Evo's man put a tracker in it, after the cafe incident. The honesty was a punch. He had tracked me. But he had also seen me. He had seen the Helix Bridge. You're suspicious of me, he said. Good. You should be. But I am also suspicious of men who build ugly things. The Wyeth plan for the harbor is ugly. It's cheap, and it will fail. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message. It was from St. Halcyon Home. Notification. Dear Miss Reyes, your mother's care plan has been upgraded to our Premier Wellness package, effective immediately. Your monthly co-pay will be adjusted. My blood ran cold. I texted back I didn't authorize this. The reply was instant. It is a mandatory facility-wide upgrade for her wing. Your new monthly balance has doubled. I couldn't breathe. Doubled. I couldn't even afford the original. This was it. This was the squeeze. Sarah, I said, my voice strangled. Sarah was already at my side, reading the screen. It's a contract trap, she hissed. They're leveraging her health. It's Wyeth. I'm certain of it. I looked at Carmine, my panic rising like bile. You have to. I can't. I need that $50,000. No, Carmine said. His voice was absolute. That money is poison. It's their leverage. You touch it. You're guilty. You're the mob girl they want you to be." "Then what do I do?" I screamed. "They're going to kick her out." "We cut their anchor," Carmine said, his voice calm and lethal. "Sarah will find the shadow fund Wyeth is using to subsidize St. Halcyon. We will expose it, we will cut the line, but that is defense." He turned to me. "I need a fence, and I need it from you." "Me, I'm an out-of-work student." "You're an architect," he corrected. He unrolled a large blueprint on the drafting table. It was a map of his legal shipping routes, his trucking company, his warehouses. "It's inefficient, the city gridlocks. My drivers are angry, the unions are complaining. The public thinks we're a nuisance." He looked at me, his dark eyes intense. "You designed the Helix Bridge. You understand load and stress and flow. I want you to look at this. Redesign my routes. Make them quiet. Make them efficient. Make them invisible. Help me win the public. Kala, help me show them that my infrastructure works." It was a trade. My mother's safety for my intellect. He wasn't just offering protection. He was offering a job. "I will." I said. "I was a partner now, not a victim. I'll help with the logistics, on a technical basis. This is a contract, not anything else." I was drawing a boundary, a thick black line. Carmine looked at me for a long time. He accepted the line. "Technical basis," he agreed. He looked at my sketches, the ones of the Helix Bridge I had brought. He reached out, not to me, but to the drawing. He traced the main suspension curve, the one I had drawn 1,000 times. I watched his hand, and I saw it. His fingertips, the ones tracing my dream, were trembling, just slightly, a barely perceptible tremor in a man made of iron. He was a man of absolute control, and he was fighting it. He was learning to be gentle, and it was costing him. The rain came just after midnight, a sudden, violent downpour that hammered the tin roof of the lumen. It was a deafening, isolating sound, walling us off from the rest of New Adelphi. The single overhead light in my new office felt too bright, so I was working just by the glow of the drafting lamp, the circle of yellow light illuminating the plans for Carmine's shipping routes. I had also built a model. It was rough, made of chipboard and glue, a small-scale version of my Helix Bridge. It was my anchor, a reminder of my own work in this new, dangerous world. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. He moved silently, but the floorboards of the old warehouse had their own voice. He was at the door, his suit jacket off, his white shirt sleeves still rolled up. He didn't knock. He just stood there, watching me. "You're still working," he said. It wasn't an accusation. "So are you," I replied, gesturing with my pencil. "Your routes are a mess. It's all right-angle turns and choke points." He walked in, his eyes drawn not to his blueprints, but to my model. "The Helix," he said, his voice soft. "It's just chipboard," I said, suddenly self-conscious. He reached out, his long fingers tracing the curve of the main arch. "It's the stress distribution. It's elegant." He looked at me. "You're trying to make it light, but strong." "That's the point of a suspension bridge," I said, my voice clinical, trying to keep the technical wall between us. His hand was still on the model, near mine. Our fingers brushed, a static shock in the humid, rain-filled air. I pulled my hand back. He didn't. He kept his gaze on the bridge. "When I was 9, he said, his voice distant. "My family lived in a house on the coast. We called it the Pomegranate Red House. It had this huge, vaulted ceiling in the main room, like a small cathedral. My father, he cut corners. He used a contractor who used bad steel, salt-rotted rebar." He paused, and the sound of the rain filled the silence. "There was a storm, a northeaster. The vault collapsed. It just gave way. My uncle was in that room." He looked at his hand, tracing the arch. "I've had an obsession with sound structures ever since. I hate weakness. I hate failure. I hate men who build things that fall." He was telling me a secret. He was showing me the blueprint of his own trauma, the origin of his obsession with control. A loud metallic clang echoed from the warehouse floor below, followed by shouting. Carmine was instantly alert, the soft moment gone. He moved to the window, peering down into the dark yard. A truck was trying to back into the bay, and a heavy steel drum had rolled off the forklift. He swore, a low, soft sound. "They'll break the axle." He turned and was gone, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I watched from the mezzanine window. He walked out into the center of the yard, into the driving rain. He didn't shout, he just directed. He spoke to the driver, gestured to the forklift operator. He put his own shoulder to the drum, helping them roll it clear. He was soaked in seconds, the rain plastering his white shirt to his back, his dark hair slicked to his head. When he came back up, he was dripping, leaving dark puddles on the wooden floor. "You're soaked," I said, stating the obvious. "It's handled." He ran a hand through his hair, water spraying. I did it without thinking. I grabbed one of the clean rags I used for my drafting board and walked up to him. He was standing under one of the low-hanging filament bulbs. He tensed as I got close, his whole body coiling like a spring. Your collar is," I stammered. The collar of his expensive shirt was hopelessly folded under the neck of his undershirt. I reached up, my fingers brushing the skin of his neck. He was so warm. The cold rain on his skin was turning to steam. I smelled the storm. I smelled the faint, clean scent of his soap, and I smelled the coffee I had brewed hours ago, still lingering in the air. It was a strange, intimate chord of memory. The storm, the man, and my old life. I fixed the collar. My hands were on his chest. I could feel the solid, steady thump, thump, thump of his heart under my palm. It was so calm, a slow, powerful engine. He was looking down at me. His eyes were dark, the pupils wide in the dim light. The rain hammered on the roof, a frantic rhythm against the calm beat in his chest. I should have stepped back. I should have returned to the safety of my drafting table. Instead, I tilted my head back. I met his gaze. "Calla," he whispered. It was a warning. I put my other hand on his chest, feeling the rain-damp cotton, the solid muscle beneath. "Do you want me to kiss you?" I asked. The words were quiet, but they were mine. I was not being taken. I was not being used. I was choosing. He didn't move for a long second. I thought he would say no, that he would reestablish the boundary. "Yes," he said. His voice was rough. He leaned down, slowly. There was no rush, no greedy consumption. It was a negotiation. He gave me every possible second to pull away. I rose on my toes, just slightly, and met him. The kiss was thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of a romance novel. It was a press of lips, a test of trust. It was warmth, and it was the taste of rain, and it was a promise of safety. His hand, the one with the faint tremor, came up and cupped the back of my neck, his fingers gentle in my damp hair. My hands were flat against his chest, holding him, anchoring myself. I felt the defense inside me, the high, cold wall I had built to survive, begin to crack. He deepened the kiss, just slightly, and I felt a jolt of panic. It was too much, too fast. I pulled back, just an inch, my breath catching. He stopped, instantly. He didn't pull me closer. He didn't demand more. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His breathing was heavy, but controlled. "Your boundary," he said, his voice a strained whisper, "is my law." That one sentence did more to shatter my defenses than the kiss ever could. He was giving me back the control that everyone else had tried to steal. I trusted him in that moment, more than I had trusted anyone in a very long time. "Okay," I whispered, "we can go slow." He nodded, not moving. Later. I don't know how much later. We found a section of the warehouse wall that was painted with old, black chalkboard paint used for tracking inventory. I picked up a piece of chalk. "Conditions," I said. He stood beside me, watching. I wrote 1, no force, ever. He took the chalk from my hand. His handwriting was sharp, angular. 2, no violence on my behalf. I took it back. 3. You do not touch Miri or Juno. Their lives are not yours. He wrote 4. No more surveillance. Personal privacy is respected. We stood there looking at our treaty, written in dust on a brick wall. The nights fell into a new rhythm. I worked on his roots, losing myself in the mathematics of flow and logistics. He would be in the main room, running his shadow empire, his voice a low, constant murmur on the phone. Sarah would come and go, her face a mask of legal fury. One night, or rather 3 in the morning, he came into my office. I was rubbing my eyes, the blueprints blurring. "You're tired," he said. "I'm fine, I just need more coffee." "No," he said. "You need tea." He went to the small kitchen unit in the corner and made ginger tea, the sharp, clean smell cutting through the stale air. He handed me a mug. Our fingers brushed. This time I didn't pull away. He sat on the stool opposite my desk, sipping his own tea. He wasn't watching me with that surveying gaze anymore. His eyes were softer. The drawbridge of his defenses was lowering. He was not a Don. He was just Carmine. My phone, sitting on the desk between us, lit up. A message from at Ghost Pier. My stomach turned to ice. Carmine saw it. His eyes hardened instantly. I opened it. It was just one line. "The lumen has a leaky roof, and so does his heart." I looked up at Carmine. He had gone utterly still. This was not a text from across the city. This was not from a rooftop. A leaky roof. His heart. That was a reference to our conversation, to the pomegranate red house. No one had heard that conversation except me and him. Unless... "They're close," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Carmine, they're here. They can hear us." He didn't panic. He just set his mug down slowly. He raised one finger to his lips. "Shh." Then he made a swift downward slashing motion with his hand. "Kill the lights." I slammed my hand down on the switch of the drafting lamp. The room plunged into near total darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the filament bulbs in the hallway. He was at my side in a second. He didn't grab me. His hand, warm and calloused, closed gently around my wrist, a gesture of pure guidance. He pulled me, silently, off the stool and drew me back, away from the windows, into the solid concrete shadows of the inner wall. He put his back to the wall and pulled me in front of him, shielding me with his body. We stood there, in the dark, breathing each other's air, listening. The only sound was the rain, a steady, endless drum. After a long minute, I felt the terror begin to subside, replaced by the solid reality of his presence. I was safe. I leaned back, my head coming to rest on his shoulder. I could feel the tension in his muscles, the coiled readiness. "Carmine," I whispered. So low it was just a breath against his skin. "Don't make me your story." I felt his lips brush my hair as he spoke, his voice a ghost in the dark. "I'm not Calla. You're the storyteller." The war we were fighting was silent, waged on paper and in fiber optic cable. Sarah Novick, looking more like a general than a lawyer, filed a 700-page community grievance petition at the Civic War Forum. It was a technical marvel of legal obstruction, demanding a full environmental and economic audit of the Wyeth Trust. Carmine's order to his men was absolute, an extension of our agreement. No smoke, no kitchen knives, he had said. And that now included the visible threat of force. His men at the forum were dressed like day traders, their suits immaculate, their hands empty. They were there to observe, to be seen being peaceful. They offered no provocation, giving Wyeth security no excuse to escalate. Then it was my turn. Juno's podcast, Tip Jar Truths, went live that afternoon. My voice was shaky, but Juno had coached me. I didn't talk about Carmine. I didn't talk about the $50,000. I talked about the jar. "Dignity," I said into the microphone. The small foam cover smelling of dust and coffee. We talk about it like it's a luxury item. It's not. It's the baseline. It's the thing you have left when you've paid rent and bought groceries. It's what the night shift runs on. And they spit on it. The Wyeth Trust wanted to buy my story. They wanted to buy my humiliation. But my dignity isn't for sale, and neither is this city. The response was immediate. The docklight, with its new, gleaming plate glass window, was packed. People bought coffee and left $5 tips. Miri was smiling for the first time in a week. We were winning. Of course, Wyeth didn't like the new narrative. They hit back, hard. A new closure notice was plastered on the docklight's door. It wasn't the flimsy, threatening one from before. This one was heavy, embossed, and official. It was a temporary injunction from the Metropolitan Integrity Commission, citing our association with a known criminal entity as a public nuisance. And at the bottom, small but clear, was the secondary stamp of approval, ESIB, the Eastern Seaboard Integrity Bureau. They weren't hiding the connection anymore. Miri's smile vanished. The podcast listeners, the neighborhood support, none of it mattered against a stamp from a quasi-federal agency. This time, Carmine didn't show up. He didn't make a phone call. He sent an email. It was an anonymous, encrypted file sent from a dead drop to the city editor of the New Adelphi Ledger. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a cache of weapons. It was a stack of accounting ledgers, scanned and annotated. It showed $3 million in consulting fees, paid by the Wyeth Trust directly into a shell company controlled by ESIB's director. It was a non-violent leak, a bloodless coup. The Ledger, smelling a Pulitzer, ran the story above the fold the next morning. The headline was devastating: Integrity Bureau or Private Piggy Bank. We had them for about 2 hours. Then, At Ghost Pier went live. My phone and Juno's and Miri's all lit up at once. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from NextWave. At Ghost Pier was streaming. The video was shaky, filmed in the pre-dawn light from a dark car. It showed a Sorrenti Combine transport truck, one of the ones whose routes I was redesigning. It was parked, seemingly broken down, blocking the main ambulance entrance to the St. Halcyon home. A few actors, dressed as nurses, were standing outside, wringing their hands, looking distressed. The caption, scrolling in real time, was sickening. Sorrenti Combine sending a message to the elderly blocking emergency access to St. Halcyon. How sick. It was a lie, a brilliant, vicious, terrifying lie. It was staged, every second of it, but it looked real. The comments section exploded. The public goodwill we had earned evaporated in a second. We weren't the underdogs anymore. We were the monsters threatening old people. "They're framing us," I said, my voice vibrating with rage. I was in the lumen, watching the stream on a large monitor. Carmine was watching with me, his face carved from ice. He was silent, his fury a palpable thing in the room. "Ivo," he said. Ivo Kestrel was already at his terminal, his fingers flying. "The stream is bouncing, same as before, but they're getting sloppy. The origin point is weak. It's coming from Old Ferry Terminal 6. That's Icarus turf." "I'm sending the kite unit." Carmine said he was already moving, grabbing a radio. "Kite unit?" I asked. "Observation only," he said, not looking at me. "My tech and surveillance team. They don't engage. They document." "I'm going," I said. Carmine turned, his entire body language a solid wall. "No." "They used my mother," I said, my voice low and hard as steel. "They used her home. They staged this to paint you as a monster, and me as your accomplice. I am not going to sit here while they do that. I am going to prove it's a lie." He stared at me for a long, heavy second, and he was measuring my resolve against the risk. The muscle in his jaw flexed. "3 conditions, Mayor," he said, his voice final. 1, you do not leave Ivo's side, not for a foot. 2, you do not speak. You do not make a sound. 3, you wear this. He pulled a heavy, waxed canvas jacket from a hook. It was too big for me, smelling faintly of oil in the river. There was a tracker stitched into the lining, a hot tracker. I authorized it. You permitted it. Am I clear? "Clear," I said, pulling the jacket on. Old Ferry Terminal 6 was a skeleton, a rotting monument to a dead era. It smelled of rust, dead fish, and diesel fuel. The kite unit. 3 men dressed in black, moved like ghosts. Ivo led me up a flight of rusted metal stairs, his hand on my back, guiding me, shielding me. We heard the voices before we saw them. And loop the footage of the nurse crying, a bored voice said. It really sells it. Ivo held up a hand, signaling a halt. He peered around the corner of a crumbling wall. He found it on the 2nd floor, in what used to be the station manager's office. It was a set, a pathetic little studio. A green screen was tacked to a peeling wall. Audio mixers, laptops, and a high-definition camera were pointed at a chair. A young man with a headset was editing the footage of the truck, looping it, making it look like it had been there for hours. "It's all faked," Ivo whispered, filming everything with his own device. But I saw something else. In the corner, on a card table littered with empty energy drink cans, was a model. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was my Helix bridge. But it was wrong. It was a mockery. Whoever built it had used my drawings, my beautiful, elegant renderings, and they had twisted them. The arches were bent, the suspension cables were snapped, made to look like they had collapsed into a pile of junk. It was a tiny, cruel, personal message. They weren't just attacking my present. They were attacking my dream. I felt a surge of rage so pure it almost blinded me. As I stared at the broken model, my phone rang. It wasn't Ghostpeer. It was Sarah. I answered, my hand shaking. Her voice was sharp, brittle, stripped of all legal calm. "Carmine, they're moving. Wyeth just called an emergency closed-door session at City Hall. Tonight, in 1 hour. They're citing imminent economic failure of the port and forcing a vote on the 30-year harbor contract. They're locking us out. It's the knockout. Carmine. They're gonna win." This was it. The time bomb had just gone off. The podcast, the leak, the fake studio. None of it mattered if Wyeth locked the city into a 30-year deal. I relayed the message to Carmine over Ivo's radio. There was a long, static-filled silence. Then, Carmine's voice came back, deadly calm. "We're leaving. Now." We were back in the Lumen 20 minutes later. Sarah was there, pacing, her face pale. "We can't stop the vote, Carmine. They have the ESIB backing. It's legal." "They want to use the law," Carmine said. He was standing at my drafting table, but he wasn't looking at the route maps. He was looking at my other drawings, my professional analysis, the structural integrity reports I had run on the current wharf pilings, the ones showing the saltwater corrosion, the stress fractures. He picked up his phone, and he didn't call Ivo. He called a number I didn't recognize, a direct line. "This is Sorrenti," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, pure business. "Activate the Bureau. I'm citing Section 14B, structural risk." My head snapped up. "Yes," he continued, his eyes locked on my drawings. "I have a third-party structural analysis citing imminent failure risk to the wharf's foundation. I want every active contract on that pier suspended, pending a full, independent structural review. Yes, all of them. Wyeth's included. Effective immediately." He hung up. He looked at me, the ghost of a smile on his lips. He had just activated his own ghost agency, the Bureau of Harbor Compliance. He had used my technical skill, my architectural analysis, as the clean legal basis to stop the entire game. "You want to play by the rules, Calla," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Fine. We'll use your rules." The City Hall vote was scheduled for 8 p.m. It was 7:10. We did not go straight to the tactical room Sarah had set up. We did not go to the fight. Carmine's sedan, the silent Ardea 7, cut through the evening traffic. Climbing the steep hills that overlooked the harbor, he was silent, his profile rigid, his eyes on the road. We stopped at Crown Line Overlook. It was the highest point in New Adelphi, a place for tourists and teenagers. But tonight, it was empty. The wind was sharp, cold and clean, smelling of pine and the distant dark salt of the sea. Evo and two other men stayed by the car, their dark forms melting into the shadows, a perimeter of quiet loyalty. Carmine and I walked to the stone balustrade. The city was spread out below us, a carpet of amber and diamond, a living circuit board. The lights of the waterfront looked like a string of silk, fragile and beautiful. "The day of the tip jar," he said, his voice low, the wind snatching at the words. He wasn't looking at the city. He was looking at me. I was driving past. I have a live feed of the cameras on that block. I saw those three men go into your cafe. I saw their body language. I saw the leader lean over the counter. He paused, turning to face me fully. And then I saw your face. On the monitor. You weren't afraid. You were calculating. You looked like you were measuring the distance, figuring out how hard you'd have to swing the metal scoop to break his teeth. It was a no-surrender look. He let out a small breath, a puff of white in the cold. I told my driver to stop. I turned the car around. I processed this. He hadn't been a savior descending from on high. He had been a man who recognized a fellow fighter. "They rejected your Helix Bridge," he said, nodding toward the dark, empty stretch of water between the coal yards and the residential shore. "They said it was a dream. They tried to break your structure." "And they broke yours," I whispered, remembering his story. The pomegranate red house, the collapsed vault. We stood there, two people defined by the structures that had been taken from us. He understood my bridge. I understood his obsession with foundations. He reached out. He was wearing his thin, black leather gloves. He didn't touch my face, but just brushed his gloved fingers against my hair, tucking a strand that the wind had whipped free back behind my ear. His touch was incredibly gentle. "I won't use your wound to win my war, Calla," he said. "Your bridge. It's not a weapon for me. It's the point." "And your uncle is not my leverage," I answered, my voice thick. He stepped closer. The cold air was a wall between us, but the heat from his body was a furnace. I was wearing the heavy, waxed canvas jacket he'd given me at the Lumen. He was in his dark wool overcoat. There was a wall of heavy fabric between us, but it didn't seem to matter. His eyes searched mine, asking a question. "Is this okay?" he whispered. I felt my heart hammer, a slow, heavy beat. Yes. My breath plumed. Mingling with his, he leaned down, agonizingly slowly. This was not the shocked, testing kiss from the Lumen. This was intentional. It was a slow, deep, grounding press of lips. It was warmth against the cold. It was safety in the middle of a war. And it was a promise. My hands, which were shaking, came up and fisted in the thick, expensive lapels of his overcoat. I wasn't trying to pull him closer, I was just holding on. His gloved hand slid from my hair, down my neck, to my back, resting flat between my shoulder blades. It was a solid grounding, respectful pressure. There was no demand, only presence. A low, mournful sound echoed up from the harbor. A container ship, heading out to sea. The foghorn. It broke the spell. We pulled back, but only an inch. His forehead rested against mine. His eyes were closed. "When this is settled," he said, his voice rough, strained, "when the votes are counted, when the boards are clean, I'm going to ask for more than this." I opened my eyes, looking at the man, not the myth. "You can ask," I whispered, my voice steady, "if I'm the one who decides to give." A crackle in his earpiece. He straightened, his whole body instantly rigid, the moment shattered. He was the Dawn again. "What is it?" he said, turning his head slightly. Evo's voice was a low hiss, but I could hear it. "We have a tail, black pickup, no plates, parked at the access road junction. They've been dark, just waiting for us." Carmine didn't flinch. "Kite unit, audio flare, draw them east, 80 seconds. He grabbed my hand, not my wrist, my hand. "We're leaving, not the car." Service stairs. A high-pitched electronic whine erupted from the far side of the overlook, followed by a percussive thump. A sonic flare, designed to mimic a multiple-car collision. The black pickup's engine roared to life, its headlights slicing the darkness as it sped toward the diversion. "Now," Carmine said, pulling me toward a dark, unmarked steel door in the side of the stone lookout. We plunged into a cold, concrete service stairwell, our footsteps echoing in the dark. As we descended, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. At City Hall, I got to them. Alan and Cho, the 2 swing votes. I didn't use the corruption files. I used your structural analysis. The 18 millimeters per year sinkage. They're both civil engineers by trade. They're terrified. They're on our side. We have a chance. Another buzz. Juno. It was a picture. She was outside the docklight. Miri had hung a huge hand-painted sign in the window. It read, Community Corporate Power. Behind the sign, a line of people stretched around the block, all waiting to buy coffee. A silent, soft-pressure campaign an hour before the vote. We emerged at the bottom of the hill. A different car, a nondescript gray sedan, was waiting. We got in. We drove to City Hall. We met Sarah on the marble steps. Carmine's entire team was there. Ivo, Sarah, and 3 others from the kite unit, who I now saw were just young men and women in sharp business attire, carrying briefcases. Sarah held up 3 identical black cases, cameras, audio recorders, and copies of the structural report, as requested. Carmine nodded. No kitchen knives, he said to his team. He looked at me, a silent confirmation. He had kept his word. Not a single gun, not a single visible weapon would pass the gates of City Hall. This was a war of paper and law. We walked inside, our heels clicking on the polished marble floor, a small, quiet army. The air was thick with tension. We were waiting for the council chambers to open. I couldn't stand the waiting. I leaned against a cold pillar, pulling out my phone. I needed to connect with the one person who wasn't in this fight, my mother. I found the audio file I'd recorded at the Lumen, the sound of the rain hammering on the tin roof, the sound that had become my comfort. I sent it to her, thinking of you. It's raining here. A minute later, a reply, an audio file. I pressed the phone to my ear. I heard the faint hiss of a hospital room, and then her voice. It was so weak, so papery thin, but it was her. She was humming, and then, in a cracked whisper, she began to sing, an old Spanish lullaby, one she hadn't sung to me since I was a child, a La Ruru Nina. The sound of her voice, that piece of my childhood, broke through all my walls. The tears came, hot and sharp and silent. I turned my face into the cold marble pillar, my shoulders shaking. I felt Carmine move. He was suddenly at my back. I braced myself, expecting a hand on my shoulder, a word of comfort, an intrusion. He did nothing. He just stood there, a silent, solid presence, an inch from my back. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. He simply stood guard, giving me the privacy and the space to break. He was a shield against the world, even from himself. I wiped my eyes, pulling myself back together. I nodded, just once, to let him know I was okay. Juno ran up, her face pale, holding her phone. Calla, they just posted. She showed me the screen, a new tweet from at Ghost Pier. The bridge falls tonight, it read, not with concrete, but with hearts. It was a new threat, an ambiguous, terrifying threat. They weren't planning to use violence. They were planning to destroy us in that room, in front of everyone. The council chamber was a cathedral of old wood, bad lighting, and stale fear. It was packed. The Wyeth Trust and their army of lawyers took up the first 5 rows, a sea of identical navy blue suits. We, my small team of Sarah, Ivo, and the kite unit with their briefcases took the back row. Carmine didn't sit with us. He stood in the shadows by the main entrance, a silent observer. His presence, a weight in the room. The president of the council, a man whose suit was as tired as his face, called the emergency session to order. Wyeth's lawyer, a sharp-faced man from the Metropolitan Integrity Commission, spoke first. He was slick and dismissive. Mr. President, members of the council, we are here to discuss an economic emergency. The port needs leadership. The Wyeth Trust provides it. The allegations. He said the word like it tasted bad. leaked to the ledger are unsubstantiated, anonymous slander. The injunction filed against the Docklight Cafe is a matter of public safety. The evidence against this contract is, frankly, insufficient to delay this vital vote." He sat down. The room was his. He had set the narrative. We were just noise. Then Sarah stood up. She walked to the central podium, her heels clicking, a sharp, precise sound. "Sarah Novick, counsel for Miri Lax and the Docklight Cafe," she said, her voice cutting through the smug silence. "The gentleman is correct. This isn't about slander. It's about safety, which is why we invoke Section 14B of the new Adelphi Harbor Compliance Act." A confused murmur went through the chamber. Even Wyeth's lawyers looked at each other, frowning. "Section what?" the president asked, shuffling his papers. "Section 14B, Sarah repeated, as if reciting from memory. No contract, private or public, pertaining to harbor infrastructure modification can be ratified without a full community load and structural viability assessment, presented in an open forum, an assessment, I might add, that the Wyeth Trust has conveniently failed to conduct." The lawyer for Wyeth jumped to his feet. "Objection! That's an archaic provision. It hasn't been used in 50 years. It's a procedural trick." "It is the law," Sarah said, her voice flat. "A law pushed through by the Bureau of Harbor Compliance after the 78 pier collapse. She had given Carmine's ghost agency a history, a foundation. And we just happen to have a community-led structural assessment right here." She turned, her gaze locking on me. "The council will now hear from Cala Reyes, a lead designer on the Helix Bridge project and a structural analyst." My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. I grabbed my laptop and walked to the podium, my legs shaking. I plugged my machine into the projector. The massive screen behind the council lit up. It wasn't just a drawing, it was my full digital model, rendered in 3D. "This," I said, my voice trembling for only a second, "is the current wharf. This is the structure the Wyeth Trust wants to build their 30-year plan on." I hit a key. "These are the wind maps for the last 10 years, showing the vortex effect around Pier 19. I hit another. "These are the seismic readings from the harbor fault line." Then I ran the simulation. "And this," I said, as the model began to bleed colors, "is the stress deformation. Based on the load of their proposed development, Wyeth's plan will cause a foundational sinkage of 18 millimeters per year. The wharf will be structurally unsound in less than 5. The room was silent. The two engineers on the council, Alan and Cho, were leaning forward, their faces pale. I wasn't a barista. I wasn't a mob girl. I was an architect. I put up my final image, the Helix Bridge, glowing and strong, next to their sinking, failing plan. "The community doesn't need a cheap patch," I said. "It needs a real foundation." A wave of applause started from the back benches, from the dock workers and shop owners, and it swelled, filling the room. Wyeth's lawyer was apoplectic. He knew he had lost the technical argument, so he went for the gut. "This is a distraction," he shouted over the noise. "This is a performance by an associate of Carmine Sorrenti. She talks about community. What about this?" He produced a flash drive. "We have footage," he announced to the room, "of a Sorrenti combine truck this morning, blocking emergency access to the St. Halcyon nursing home, threatening the elderly. This is the community she represents." The room gasped. The council members looked horrified. The guard moved to take the drive. "Objection," Juno Pell shouted from the press gallery. "You are not recognized." "Miss," the president snapped. "I don't need to be," Juno yelled, holding up her phone. "I'm a journalist, and I'm live streaming. You want to see footage from St. Halcyon? How about we show them the raw footage from Old Ferry Terminal 6? Instead, she hit a button on her phone. The feed from her Next Wave stream, Tip Jar Truths, hijacked the public Wi-Fi. It appeared on the phones of half the people in the room. It was Evo's footage, the green screen, the board actor, the sound mixing board, and then a crystal-clear shot of the young man at the controls, who turned, startled, to look at Evo's camera. "That," Juno narrated, her voice booming from dozens of tiny speakers, is the live stream you're about to see, and that," she zoomed in on the man's face, "is Nessa Wyeth, the chief's niece and the head of their PR, also known as Ghost Peer." Nessa Wyeth, sitting in the second row, went white as a sheet. Her uncle, the head of the trust, looked like he was going to have a stroke. It was a kill shot. Sarah Novick stepped back to the podium, calm as a winter morning. She held up a single piece of paper, the invoice. "And in case there was any doubt about the insufficient evidence," she said, her voice resonating with pure, cold logic, "this is a copy of the $3 million consulting invoice from the Wyeth Trust to the Eastern Seaboard Integrity Bureau, the same ESIB that stamped their closure notice on my client's cafe, the same ESIB whose representative is sitting right there." She pointed to a man in the front row. All eyes turned. The ESIB representative, who had been looking so smug, was now stammering, his face bright red, shuffling his papers, looking for an escape. It was a checkmate, a bloodless, paper-cut execution. The council president, seeing his entire political future imploding, slammed his gavel. "Order, order, in light of this new information, this vote is postponed indefinitely." He slammed it again. "This council is opening a full, independent investigation into the Wyeth Trust, the ESIB, and the Metropolitan Integrity Commission. This session is adjourned." It was chaos. Wyeth and his team were screaming, shoving papers into briefcases. Nessa was being shielded by security. The press, led by Juno, swarmed them. We won. We just stood there, in the back row, as the tide of angry, defeated suits washed past us. In the grand marble lobby, it was our turn to be swarmed. The community members, the dock workers, the other small business owners, they all came to me. They were clapping me on the back, shaking my hand, thanking me. "You showed 'em, Calla. That was brilliant. Way to stand up for us." I was overwhelmed, blinking, trying to smile. I looked for Carmine. He was 20 feet away, standing by a pillar, just as he had been in the chamber. He was watching me. He made no move to join me. He didn't try to take credit. He just watched, his face unreadable, but his eyes were proud. He was giving me the moment. He understood that this victory had to be mine, and mine alone. A small, elderly man in a building maintenance uniform shuffled up to me, his eyes averted. "Miss Reyes." "Yes." This came for you, to the mailroom, about an hour ago." He held out a simple, brown paper-wrapped package, about a foot long. "I didn't order—" Ivo Kestrel was at my side in a fraction of a second. His hand closed on the maintenance man's shoulder. Not hard, but with absolute authority. "Where did you get this?" "Mailroom, sir, I swear, just like I said." Ivo's eyes were scanning the package. He pointed to a small, hand-drawn symbol in the corner, next to my name. It was a crude drawing of a pier, a ghost pier. My blood turned to ice. Ivo took the package from the man. "Clear the area," he said, his voice a low command. The well-wishers sensed the change, the sudden drop in temperature, and they backed away. Ivo placed the package on the marble floor. He didn't rip it open. He methodically, carefully, sliced the tape with a small pocket knife. He unfolded the paper. Inside was not a bomb. It was a piece of metal. It was heavy, dark, and curved. A piece of rusted 19th century steel, pitted with salt. It looked like a fragment of an arch, cut from an old bridge. Beneath it was a single white card. I picked it up. The message was typed. "Any arch collapses if the one holding the pillar betrays." I looked at Carmine. He had seen it. He was at my side, the space between us gone. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He took the note from my trembling hand. He read it. His jaw clenched so hard I thought it would break. He didn't look at Ivo. He didn't look at the threat. He looked at me, his dark eyes boring into mine. He spoke, his voice so low, so soft. It was for me alone, a vow. "No one," he said, "touches you while I'm still breathing." We didn't have time to celebrate the victory at City Hall. We'd only been back at the Lumen for 10 minutes. the adrenaline still singing in my veins, when the world went black. The lights, the monitors, the hum of the servers, everything died at once. A total, plunging darkness. "Stay," Carmine's voice commanded, a low growl in the black. A second later, the monitors flickered back on, but with a sick, greenish-white cast, the infrared backup system. We were ghosts on a screen. "Broad-spectrum power cut," Ivo Kestrel said from his terminal, his voice unnervingly calm. "They've isolated the block." "They're coming," I whispered. "No," Ivo said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "They're drawing us out. I've got a signal. A powerful, unshielded telemetry feed. It's a drone controller. High gain." "Where?" Carmine asked, his body a tense silhouette against the green glow. Ivo's face tightened. "Damn it, it's on the roof. St. Halcyon home." My blood went cold. The threat from the mailroom. Any arch collapses. The fake truck. The tweet. It all snapped into focus. It was a choice. A sick, twisted ultimatum. They were threatening my mother to get me out of the lumen. They wanted me to run, to choose between my safety and hers. "They're baiting us," Carmine said, his voice a blade. "They'll have a team waiting at the home, ready to grab you the second you show up. And they'll have another team waiting here for me." "You can't," I said, my voice strangled with panic as I grabbed his arm. "Carmine, please, you can't go there. You can't turn my mother's home into a war zone. No smoke. No kitchen knives. You promised. You can't. Please." He looked at my hand on his arm, then at my face. The cold fury in his eyes softened. Just for a fraction of a second, he nodded. "You're right," he said. "Your rules. We won't go in hard. We'll use a virtuous lens." He turned to Sarah. "The Bureau. Now, I want a full, non-negotiable emergency medical transfer order for Kala's mother. Site. Unstable air quality from the nearby port. Something they can't fight in court." Sarah was already on her phone. "Done." "Ivo," Carmine said. "The kite unit, I want you to rig the RDS-7 with a signal spoofer. Make it look like I'm in that car, and send it on a hard run to the coal yards. Make it loud, make it fast. Nessa Wyeth wants me. She can come find me." He turned to me. "She'll take the bait. She's arrogant. She wants the kill shot herself." "And us?" I asked. "We're taking the bus." 20 minutes later, I was standing on a dark street corner, 2 blocks from the lumen, my heart a trapped bird in my chest. A city bus, the number 12 line, hissed to a stop in front of me. The doors opened. The driver, a burly man with a union pin on his jacket, just nodded. "Rough night for a ride, miss." The bus was empty, except for one small woman in the back, wrapped in a blanket. My mother. Sarah had worked a miracle. A compliance team, 2 of Carmine's men in legitimate paramedic uniforms, had used the official order to extract my mother for her emergency checkup 3 minutes before Nessa's drone signal had even gone live. They had been 1 step ahead. I ran down the aisle and fell to my knees, burying my face in her lap. She was frail, confused, but she smelled like home. Kala, Mija, what? "It's okay, Mama," I whispered, holding her hand. "We're just going for a ride." The bus pulled away from the curb, merging into the sparse, late-night traffic, a ghost in plain sight. Across the city, at the coal yards, the trap was sprung. Nessa Wyeth, high on her phantom power, had personally led a team of Icarus crew thugs to the dark pier. They had seen the RDS-7, Carmine's signature car, parked and waiting. They surrounded it, but when they smashed the windows, the car was empty. Just a small, blinking signal spoofer on the front seat. And then he appeared. Carmine walked out from behind a stack of rusted shipping containers. He was alone. His hands were empty, held loosely at his sides. He was illuminated by the harsh headlights of their own trucks. Nessa Wyeth, furious at the deception, stepped out to face him. Her face a mask of rage, her pet at Ghost Pier was streaming live, ready to capture the downfall of the dawn. "You want me, Nessa." Carmine's voice was calm, carrying across the empty yard. "Here I am. Don't touch her." While Nessa's camera was fixed on the man she hated, another stream went live. Juno, coordinating with the dockworkers union, had a man on a motorcycle filming the side of the number 12 bus. The split screen on NextWave was devastating. On one side, Nessa Wyeth, surrounded by armed men, trying to menace an unarmed Carmine. On the other, me, holding my frail mother safely on a public bus. The public comments, which had been so quick to turn on us, turned back with a vengeance. Leave them alone. She's with her sick mom, you monsters. Wyeth is harassing a family. Nessa's live stream backfired spectacularly. She was no longer a corporate raider. She was a bully, threatening an old woman and her daughter. She saw the comments. She saw her defeat. She screamed in pure animal rage. But she was a Wyeth. She didn't give up. She adapted. She won't be safe for long, she hissed at Carmine. She pulled out her phone and made a call. All units, forget the pier. Get to Riverside Station, intercept the number 12 bus. Stop her, stop that bus. My phone buzzed. It was Evo. They're rerouting. Every Icarus man in the city is heading for Riverside. They'll be there in 5 minutes. The bus driver heard it too, his radio crackling. They're blocking the routes. Miss. Stop at the station, I said, my voice clear. I was done running. Calla, no, my mother whispered. It's okay, Mama, I'm not an architect for nothing. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call Carmine. I called Sarah. Sarah, I need a favor. Section 14B, I need you to call it in, right now. Riverside Station, the main passenger concourse. Site imminent structural failure of the main support pillars. A public safety emergency. I need every harbor compliance inspector you have. Now. We pulled into the chaotic lights of Riverside Station. As I helped my mother onto the platform, Nessa's men were already swarming the entrance, a wave of dark coats and angry faces. But they were met by another wave. A dozen men and women in bright yellow vests and hard hats, wearing the official eagle and anchor logo of the Bureau of Harbor Compliance, were already unspooling yellow caution tape. They were Carmine's men, but they were dressed in the armor of the law. Ma'am, you can't come in here, one of them shouted at Nessa. This is a controlled inspection zone. We have reports of structural instability. It was a chase seen through a lens of absolute bureaucracy. Nessa screamed for her men to grab me. I screamed for the inspectors to check the load-bearing joints. Juno was live-streaming the entire thing, her voice a sharp narration. We're here at Riverside Station, where a public safety inspection has collided with a private security team from the disgraced Wyeth Trust. Nessa was trapped. Her ESIB authority was now a joke, pending the city's investigation. She had no legal standing. The crowd, watching the confrontation, was firmly on my side. She was screaming at men with clipboards. She looked at me, her face a perfect portrait of hatred, and then she looked at Carmine, who had just arrived. He wasn't with me. He was standing on the other side of the yellow caution tape, his hands in his pockets, watching. He hadn't lifted a finger. He hadn't broken his word. He had let me, and the law, do the work. Nessa knew she was beaten. She gave a sharp, barked order. Pull out, now! Her men retreated, melting back into the night. She gave Carmine one last look of pure venom. She raised her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, a final act of spite. No, I whispered. A second later, Evo's voice crackled in Carmine's earpiece. Fire! The lumen! She had an incendiary on a timer. We were there in 5 minutes. The street was blocked by fire trucks, but the fire was already out. We ran into the main hall. It was a soaked, smoky, dripping cavern. The air was thick with the smell of wet ash and ozone. Evo was there, already checking the servers. She triggered it, but I anticipated it, he said, pointing up. Installed a new halon and water sprinkler system this morning. It doused it in 12 seconds. The water was still dripping from the ceiling, running in black. Sooty rivers down the brick walls. It had washed the grime from one section in particular, the chalkboard wall. The water had cleaned away the dust, but the chalk, waxy and stubborn, remained. 1, no force. Ever. 2, No violence on my behalf. 3. You do not touch Miri or Juno. 4. No more surveillance. Your boundary is my law. The words were still there, our treaty, and he had kept it. I turned. Carmine was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the flashing red lights of the fire trucks. He was soaked from the sprinklers, his shirt clinging to him. The fight was over. I walked toward him. Through the smoke and the puddles, I didn't stop. I walked right into him, wrapping my arms around his waist, burying my face in his chest. I was shaking. I felt his arms come around me, his hold solid as a foundation. Don't cross the line. I whispered into his wet shirt, my voice muffled. Not even tonight. He held me tighter, one hand moving to cradle the back of my head. I felt him nod, his chin brushing my hair. I'm here, Calla, he murmured, his voice a low, rough promise. I'm in your light. The dawn after the city council meeting broke cold and clear. The New Adelphi Ledger screamed the headline, Council Audit Confirms Collusion, Wyeth Ezeb Contracts Frozen. The city moved with brutal speed. The investigation, fueled by Sarah's paperwork and Juno's livestream, was a formality. The Wyeth Trust was locked out of the port. The ESIB was disbanded by noon. And my project, the Helix Bridge, was officially moved from the rejected pile to priority review for community funding. That same day, a quiet announcement was made. The Bureau of Harbor Compliance was undergoing a sudden and total restructuring. Its duties absorbed back into the Main Transportation Authority. Carmine had dissolved his shadow government. He had kept his word. The Docklight Cafe reopened. The air smelled of new paint, fresh glass, and brewing coffee. At mid-morning, Miri pointed, her eyes wide. The man who had started it all, the one with the expensive watch who had spit in my jar, was standing at the counter. He was sober, pale, and dressed in a rumpled suit. He didn't speak. He just placed a sealed envelope on the counter and slid it toward me. Then he turned and walked out. I opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten letter of apology and a certificate, signed by a judge, committing him to 20 hours of community service at the waterfront soup kitchen. Juno had her phone out. Should I film this post-it? I shook my head, folding the letter. No, my dignity doesn't need a camera. The system Calla believed in, the one Carmine had bypassed, began to work. Nessa Wyeth was charged with 3 counts of evidence tampering and conspiracy. At Ghost Pier, vanished from the internet. Carmine had every opportunity to crush the remaining Wyeth infrastructure, to salt the earth. He made no moves, sent no men. He let the city's legal system, the one I had activated, do the work. He was respecting my boundary. That night, I went to the waterfront. I needed to see it. The wind was sharp, cutting in from the sea, heavy with the smell of salt and diesel oil. I stood on the old, crumbling bulkhead, looking at the place where the bridge would one day stand. A test frame had already been erected, a single 10-foot steel arch, a proof of concept. I touched the cold, raw steel. This was my foundation. I heard his footsteps on the gravel, but I didn't turn. He didn't come to my side. He just stood, 10 feet behind me, a silent guardian in the dark. He waited. He was giving me the space to be the first one to move. I finally turned, leaving the shelter of the steel arch, and looked at him. That was his invitation. He walked toward me, his dark overcoat buttoned against the cold. He stopped an inch from me. You won, Calla, he said, his voice a low rumble, not competing with the wind. We won, I corrected. His gaze was heavy, searching my face. Is this okay, he asked. His voice was rough. Yes, I whispered. He didn't kiss me. He just reached out and unbuttoned the top of his heavy wool coat. He opened it, creating a pocket of warmth, and stepped forward, pulling me against his chest, wrapping the coat around both of us. I was surrounded by his scent, by his solid warmth. My head fit perfectly under his chin. My hands were on his chest, splayed flat, feeling the steady beat of his heart through the layers of wool and cotton. He rested his chin on the top of my head. We just stood there for a long time, watching the dark water move. I asked for more. He murmured into my hair. Is this more? I tilted my head back. His jaw was rough, his skin warmed by the shelter of the coat. Our breath mingled, a cloud of white in the cold. My fingers, still on his chest, trembled slightly. He leaned down, his eyes locked on mine. Calla. It was a question, a final check. I rose on my toes. Yes. The kiss was long and slow and deep. It was not a kiss of fire. It was a kiss of foundation. It was the taste of the cold salt air and the impossible warmth we had created. His gloved hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb rubbing the sensitive skin just below my ear. It was a kiss of trust, of promises kept, of two broken arches finally finding their load-bearing center. We pulled apart, but stayed in the shelter of the coat. The water of the harbor lapped against the pilings. It was the only sound. The next morning, the New Adelphi Ledger headline read, "Community wins against corruption, how one architect's dream saved the port." I was sitting in the Lumen, which was now my official office, reading the paper. Carmine was on the other side of the room, on the phone. When he hung up, he picked up his own copy of the paper. He read the headline. I saw him scan the article. His name was not mentioned once. He looked up at me from behind the paper, and a slow smile spread across his face. He folded the paper, accepting the anonymity. He didn't need the credit. He walked over, pulling a single, old-fashioned key from his pocket. He placed it on my drafting table. "What's this?" "The pomegranate red house," he said. "The land. I bought it back 6 months ago." I stared at him. "Why?" "I was going to build a fortress," he said. "Something solid. Something that could never fall." He nudged the key toward me. "But I was wrong. It shouldn't be a fortress. It should be a design center, a community hub, for architects who want to build things that stand. I want you to run it." He was giving me the key to his oldest wound. I looked at the key. I looked at him. "I will," I said, "on one condition." He waited. "We call it the Tip Jar Studio." He smiled. "Done." That night, we went back to the chalk wall. The words were still there, faint but clear. I found a piece of paper and a pen. "We need new rules," I said. I wrote one, no hidden cameras. All surveillance is shared. He took the pen. 2, neither of us will use the other's name, face, or story in a negotiation, ever. I wrote 3, if we disagree, we stop. We take a 20-minute walk, then we talk. We both signed it at the bottom. Calla Reyes, Carmine Sorrenti. He folded the paper and tucked it into a crack in the brick wall, right behind our original, chalk-written treaty. The final knot was untied at the first community meeting for the Helix Bridge. The room was packed. I had just finished my presentation. Then Carmine Sorrenti, who had been standing in the back, walked forward. The room tensed. He was carrying a black duffel bag. He walked to the podium, unzipped it, and turned it upside down. A brick of cash, $50,000, spilled onto the table with a heavy, dead thud. The room gasped. "This money," Carmine said, his voice clear and public, "was put on a counter in anger. It was a fine for disrespect, but it was the wrong foundation." He looked at me, then back at the crowd. "Today, it's a foundation for the right thing." He pointed to a stunned Miri Lax in the front row. "This is the new Miri Lax Urban Service Scholarship. It's for students of design, logistics, and journalism who want to build a better New Adelphi." He then looked at Juno, who was recording everything. "And the fund's first beneficiary is Tip Jar Truths to ensure they can always keep the rest of us honest." He stepped away from the podium. It wasn't a dawn. It wasn't a shadow. It was just a citizen making a donation. I looked at him. I finally understood. His power hadn't vanished. It had just changed form. He had traded the infrastructure of violence for the infrastructure of decency. I walked over to him, and in front of the entire city, I slipped my hand into his. He looked down at our joined hands, and then at me, his eyes full of a quiet, profound relief. "The Helix Bridge stands," I whispered, so only he could hear. Because both ends agree to hold the weight. I'm one end. I squeezed his hand. And you're standing in the right place. The camera pulled back, away from the applause, out the window, and high above the New Adelphi waterfront. The test arch of the bridge gleamed in the new moonlight. In the Docklight Cafe, the lights were on. On the counter sat a new, clean glass jar. The tape was gone. In its place was a small, engraved plaque. "Don't spit, pitch in." The jar was empty, except for the very bottom. There, sitting alone, was a single, heavy, old-world coin, a keepsake Carmine had put there that morning, a reminder that he had once offered $50,000. But what they had built together, that was priceless. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like, and consider hitting that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.